Duval. Welcome to Bleav in Jaguars. I'm Bucky Brooks. What's up, Duval? It is your favorite former Jaguar, Bucky Brooks, and this is Bleav in Jags, a podcast dedicated to all things Jacksonville, the Jaguars, the football team. We're excited about it because training camp is maybe 2 weeks away. In 2 weeks, we'll have an opportunity to see the Jaguars hit the field and begin their quest towards making a postseason run that hopefully results in the Jaguars maybe making a move and a push to be a Super Bowl contender. We'll see how that plays out. But before we get into today's podcast, where we're going to talk about some of the comments that Doug Pederson and Trevor Lawrence made while they were at the American Century Championship, we're going to talk about our sponsor. We're going to send a shout out to Bet Online is your number one source for all of your sports betting needs this season. From baseball, golf, soccer, right to the top fights in UFC, MMA, and boxing. Every stat, every matchup, even live odds and spreads while games are being played. When the game's over, head on over to our online casino and get in on a game of blackjack or poker or unwind with one of our over 150 slot games. Head to the website today to get in on the action. Use promo code Bleav, BLEAV, for your 50% free bet credit on your first deposit up to $250. Bet online, the game starts here. And speaking of the game starting here, we talked about it. Training camp starts in a couple weeks. So guys are getting their last minute vacations in. They're taking that last trip, last weekend getaway because they know the grind is really about to start. And for the Jaguars, that grind is going to start July 24th. That's when they have their first practice of training camp. And so I cannot wait to see what that looks like. I'm going to be in town, check out the first 3 or 4 days of practice, and we'll have all the information, my observations, the analysis, all those things will be outlined here on the podcast, Bleav in Jaguars. But before we get to that, I think it was interesting that Trevor Lawrence and Doug Pederson both made their way out to Lake Tahoe. And if you've never been to this event, this is a celebrity pro-am event where guys get a chance to really play at a great golf course. They get to relax and unwind while still kind of scratching that competitive itch. I can tell you now that there are a bunch of guys in the National Football League that love the game of golf. They love playing every chance they have an opportunity, and they love competing against their peers. And some of those peers are not only fellow football players, but you'll see baseball players and hockey players and others that are participating in the event. And so it's a great event. It's one that is kind of like a must-see if you have an opportunity to go to Lake Tahoe at this time of year because it's absolutely beautiful. But Doug Pederson and Trevor Lawrence had an opportunity to play there. And I think what is great about that is you get a chance to talk to these guys in a very relaxed environment. It's not quite where they're ramping up and having the intensity of getting ready for training camp, but they know training camp is on the horizon. So they're almost game ready, but they're willing to talk. And so at NFL Network, my day job, I had an opportunity to talk to Doug Pederson a little bit about his thoughts preparing for the year, the team, how everything may have fallen apart last year, but why he's really optimistic about the team being a much better version of itself this year. And my takeaway from that conversation is very much like the takeaways that I've had on the podcast before. Doug Pederson is determined to right the wrongs from last year. I think there were several lessons that he learned as a head coach and that the team learned in terms of the challenge of going from being good to great. The team has been 9-8 in back-to-back years. And even though those are back-to-back winning seasons, Doug Pederson comes with a championship mentality where he wants to be one of those teams that's always the last team standing, always in the Final Four. Hopefully it becomes a thing where we're always knocking on the door in the AFC Championship game and eventually the Super Bowl. And so when you come with those lofty expectations, the way the team finished down the stretch was unacceptable. Start out 8-3, and even though that 8-3 start was far from perfect, like the offense was struggling, you had some turnover issues. Defensively, you're still trying to figure it out, but the team played well enough in those key categories and key areas to win games. To watch the wheels completely fall off at the end, 1-5 down the stretch, you don't play well. You can't really move the ball consistently on offense because Trevor is beat up. On defense, you're just all over the place. The teams are running all over you. And the team just frayed And I would say under pressure, the team just didn't pull it together. Rather, they fell apart. And I think when you watch that and you're the head coach and all of these things happen under your watch, you're doggedly determined to make sure that it doesn't happen again. And so in that conversation, I had asked him a question coming on the heels of what Josh Allen had said on the Third and Long podcast with Eric Armstead about trust and trust issues and those things. And I asked him, how do you rebuild the trust within the team? And how does that go? And how essential is it to have trust on a team that is vying for a championship? And he basically said, look, trust is huge. Trust is everything. Players got to trust one another to make sure that everyone is going to do what they're expected to do when they're expected to do it. And they have to execute it in a manner that is how it's been taught in practice. And when you don't have that level of trust and you don't know what your teammates are going to do, then you run the risk of people trying to be heroes between the lines. And when you have a bunch of heroes, as noble as it may seem to be a one-man show trying to do everything, what it does is it really ruins the fabric of the team, and it puts unnecessary stress on the team to make up for someone who is trying to do too much. Last season, particularly down the end, I felt like there were a lot of people that were trying to do too much. Quarterback, some of the position players on offense and defense, just trying to do more than they need to do, as opposed to playing their 1/11th of the unit that they're on. Meaning that if I just do my job and trust that everyone else is going to do their job, things will be okay. And when you don't have the trust of your teammates and your peers, some of that shows up, and that showed up down the stretch. The other part where you don't have trust is when your players don't trust the coaches, you have things that go awry in between the lines. And no one has been on record saying that, hey, there was a distrust or a mistrust between the players and coaches. But when you keep hearing players reference trust and togetherness and cohesion and all of these things, they're telling you without telling you something was going wrong in the meeting rooms and in the locker room with the players that are on the team and the previous staff and some of the guys that may have been let go. There was something that wasn't jiving where they couldn't get what the plans were. They couldn't get it executed between the lines. And so what we've seen, and look, I mean, look, to be frank, we've seen a mass exodus of players. We saw a mass exodus of coaches. And all of this was done in an effort to make sure that this team is better connected, that the chemistry and continuity is there, and that the tactics and strategies that are being employed better fit the personnel that is in place. And when you have this, and I'm going to say this because my observation of watching the team just briefly in practice and watching the coaches or whatever, when you hire a coaching staff full of teachers, you have an opportunity to get exactly what you want on the field. And here's what I mean by that. So there are a couple of different styles of coaches that work in the league. You have the tacticians and schemers who are great on the whiteboard. They can draw up the plays. They can give up the plays and every adjustment and those things. They can talk to the scheme, and they can implement the scheme in terms of telling the players, like, here are the X's and O's. Here's how they work on the board. This is what it should look like when you get to the field. We are going to make sure that we have a scheme that has all of the answers to the test, et cetera, et cetera. And that is great. And that is great if you have a very smart team. That is great if you have a team full of veterans who kind of already know how to play the game. And now you're just talking X's and O's. And your trust from coach to player in that is that I'm going to give them the information, and then they're going to know which tools to utilize to make it right. Then you have what we call the teachers. And teachers are less concerned about scheme and more concerned about teaching the players the proper techniques and fundamentals to give themselves an opportunity to play at their best. Normally, when you have teachers in place, you have a scheme that is simpler, easy to comprehend, and then they're going to put an emphasis on how hard the team plays, how well they execute the simple schemes, and they're going to tell the players, if we play harder than the other team, if we put a premium on execution, it doesn't really matter what they do, it's what we do. And if we do what we do well, it's non-factor. We'll find a way to win, and we'll come out on top. So the team as presently constructed has a lot of younger players, has players that are still trying to learn how to play. And so when you hire a bunch of teachers, and I would say this because looking at the defensive staff, they're loaded with teachers now. Ryan Nielsen come in, does a really good job of really explaining um, and teaching, I would say, in sequential order, meaning the steps are logical in terms of how they progress throughout the teaching. And so it should be easier to digest by the players, but more importantly, it should be easier to execute because all of these things are like building blocks. So for those of you who have kids, like your kids, they crawl before they walk and then they walk before they run. And if you're teaching them how to eventually walk and run, first you have to teach them how to arm and crawl and scoot across the floor. Then they eventually they find a way to make themselves get up on their feet and they kind of stagger around, but they mastered that part of it. And then they begin to chase you all around the house and run around. Well, when you're teaching as a coach, you have to begin to kind of build your progression from backwards forwards. How do I want where do we want to get to? All right. Well, now let's work backwards to make sure that we put a plan in place that we can slowly get to where we want to by a designated date or designated time of the season. When I look at the way that this team is operating, it is very obvious and apparent to anyone who has been around the team that there is a greater emphasis on making sure that everyone understands exactly what they're doing, that they're given the tools needed to get the job done, and that it is going to be something, particularly on defense and even on offense, because you heard Press Taylor talk about this, about being simple, making sure that you do a deep dive. And what we have is what is necessary, not a lot of fluff. Let's make sure we just get good at the basics and let the other things take care of themselves. Well, defensively, you're hearing that, you're seeing that. It has been talked about. It's been talked about in pressers. You can just kind of tell when you talk to the players away from it that that is what Doug Pederson wanted done. And in having that conversation with him early in the week, it was really obvious that, look, man, he just wants this team to play fast. He wants them to be physical. He wants them to have a lot of fun doing what they do. He wants them to understand, hey, we cannot finish the way that we finished last year, but we need to take the bitter lessons from last year and use those to allow us to be a much better team this year. I will say that when you have that emphasis and you're on the eve of training camp, I can guarantee you that the early part of training camp is going to be one that is a very detailed and demanding training camp. But the details and demands are going to be focused on doing the simple things better than anyone else can do them. I think you will hear them talk about running to the ball, making good tackles, tackling in space. You hear them on offense talk about finishing runs, finishing blocks with a hat on a hat, making sure you play to and through the whistle to get things done. You'll hear them talk about quarterbacks making the proper read and making sure that the ball goes to the right spot versus the coverage, not necessarily to a designated man, but we're going to throw the ball to the open guy. Whoever gets open in time, we're throwing it to them. And they are expected to make the catch and make the plays. And it's going to be more about the collective than the individual. Because I would say going into the training camp, the theme of the year is let's have a better team and let's make sure that we finish well because we're really dialed into the fundamentals and we're in great shape and we wear people out because over time we outwork and we outlast people doing the simple things exceptionally well. My conversation with Doug Pederson has me optimistic that those things are going to happen. Now, we talked about some of the personnel changes. I asked him about the wide receiver group and why this unit could maybe be more successful without a clear or established number one receiver compared to some of the traditional models that are around the league where you have a very clear pecking order. This is wide receiver one, this is wide receiver two, this is wide receiver three. This is how they're listed in priority. And we're going to make sure that the ball goes to those guys in that determined order. In Jacksonville, that doesn't appear to be the case. You hear Coach Pederson and Press Taylor talk about this offense operates best when it works from inside out. What they're saying is this offense is better when the slot receiver and the tight ends kind of dominate the touches, and then it works from there. Also, when you hear them talk about working inside out, I Bleav there's a sense that Trevor Lawrence is best when he operates over the middle of the field and then he works to the perimeter. The reason why that can exist is because throwing over the middle of the field is the shortest throw, it's the most direct throw that you can make, and it's easy because it's right in front of where the quarterback is when it comes to reading and the progressions and those things. It matches with what I would say the two best playmakers in the passing game are Evan Ingram and Christian Kirk. They do their damage in the slot. Well, if you're thinking about what works for the quarterback, throwing over the middle of the field, he spent the majority of his time at Clemson in an RPO system that threw a lot of in-breaking routes. So it makes sense that he likes to attack the seams and things that are working over the middle. Then your best playmakers, I talked about Evan Ingram and Christian Kirk, they do their damage from the slot. They are excellent at running in-breaking routes over the middle of the field. So now your quarterback and his top weapons operate in that middle area of the field. It makes sense to build the offense around them first, and everybody else are complements or secondary to that. Well, the big part of that, in terms of making sure that the offense works from inside out, is to make sure that you have enough weapons on the outside to prevent people from jamming the middle of the field. From a defensive standpoint, when a team likes to throw in the middle, a lot of teams will play what we call single high coverage, and they will position one of those safeties right in the middle of the field, right at the distance that is needed for the first down. You hear in football terms, you hear people say, hey, they're playing at the sticks. And what that means is playing at the sticks is, hey, if there's 3rd and 8 and they need 8 yards, we're going to position someone right at 8 yards, right over the middle of the ball. And so they can take away the throws that would likely be first down throws based on how the team operates their favorite route concepts. You will see now that the Jaguars Bleav that they have weapons on the outside that can prevent teams from jamming the middle of the field, because Gabe Davis and Brian Thomas Jr. have the ability to not only win their one-on-one matchups on the outside, but they have big play potential given their histories as big play artists, first in college, but then in the pros. Gabe Davis in particular, I've quoted this at 27 touchdowns he has in his career, at least 6 touchdowns in each season of his career, and 17 of his 27 touchdowns are on the deep ball variety in terms of like big plays, splash plays, finds a way to kind of stretch the field and put the ball in the paint, which you love. Brian Thomas Jr., final season at LSU, 17 receiving touchdowns, played opposite Malik Neighbors, but still found a way to impact the game as a designated vertical stretch player. Well, now you have 2 vertical stretch guys around guys, 2 players in Evan Ingram and Christian Kirk that want to operate on horizontal plays, intermediate plays that we talked about, in breaking. Well, now you have a balanced core that prevents you from squatting at the sticks and loading up to take those guys away. So that stuff is all positive, and Doug alluded to that. The other thing that Doug talked about was kind of the culture and the environment, the locker room, and why it was really important to bring over the veterans that were brought on board to not only provide, I would say, leadership and big game experience, because I think that part showed up when you needed the team to win games down the stretch. You go 1 for 5, and you know these games have playoff implications. At some point, you want to have veterans in there say, hey, guys, there's an urgency that we need to play with, and we're not doing that. Let's get this right, because those messages are always better when it comes from the players than when it comes from the coaches. I think you've seen an emphasis on Doug wanting to make sure that he got that done. So that's why it was important. Mitch Morse, veteran player at the point of attack, leadership position, because it's a communication spot, being at center. You think about defensively, team down the middle, Darnell Savage being a safety who has experience playing for a team that is always kind of in that conversation in Green Bay. Ronald Darby's Super Bowl champion, played in Baltimore. There are high expectations in Baltimore in terms of how to play, the physicality that you have to play with, putting your tone, putting your intensity and brand on tape. That's a part of it. And so having enough of those veterans that are captains and winners and leaders, that's really, really big. So that part was really important. But I think maybe the most important part of what Doug talked about is getting the quarterback right. And there's been a lot of conversation about Trevor Lawrence since Trevor Lawrence got the big contract. You know, is he really worth the money? Should they have paid him what they paid him? Is he really a $50 million quarterback? And why do they feel the need to kind of pay him like one of those top guys? And to me, it was very clear in talking to Doug Pederson this week, but also in previous conversations, They believe that Trevor is the guy. And they believe that he's the guy before we even get to the football stuff, but because of the makeup, the intangibles, the pedigree, and who he is every day in the building. Consistent, reliable, steady demeanor. Emotions don't run too high, too low. He just kind of gets it and plays the game, and he is the same every day. And that consistency is really important from your franchise quarterback, from the guy who is really the face of the franchise. Some of that comes from his experience winning all the time in high school, winning a ton in college. And so the expectation is he expects to win. Now, I think everyone around the building would say next step for him is not only necessarily playing well, but kind of commanding the team and kind of, I would say, probably impressing more of his personality on the team, meaning that high competitive spirit that he displays, that he has, that may burn inside, maybe allowing that to come out a little more. Because as he leads, the other guys are going to follow. And so as he shows more of that alpha personality, more guys are going to respect the fact that he's the alpha, and they're going to find a line and act accordingly. Doug Pederson talked about how important it was to identify the franchise quarterback, have that quarterback in place, and now push that quarterback to take his game up a notch, because as he takes his game up a notch, he's going to bring everybody else with him. So a lot of the conversation and a lot of the expectations in training camp will be on how can we get the quarterback to play better? What can we do to make sure that the quarterback is playing at his best? Whether it's what schematics can we do, what things can we eliminate that put him in a bind where he doesn't really like it, and how can we push him to get to the next level in terms of challenge him, put more on his plate. Let's see how much he can handle before we have to scale back. Now is the time to do that, because year 3 in Pederson's offense, he should not only know the offense, he should really be able to exhaust all the route concepts and the options that are there in the progression, and then begin to add his own spin and twist on it. That's when the great quarterbacks really emerge, when they not only know the system, but they own the system, and then they add their own touch to the system that allows the system to really mold around their strengths. That's what we want to kind of see from Trevor. And Trevor, I think, look, he's always positive in his comments. He's always great when it comes to how he talks about the team, how he talks about the season ended, how the bad taste in his mouth has continued to drive him and motivate him and his team to play better. I think all those things are great. I think the maturity that he displays every time he's in front of the microphone, I think that is all great, because that's who he really is. He understands the parts of his game that he has to continue to work on, reducing the turnovers when it comes to the fumbles and some of the, I would say, poor decisions that are made in the red zone, because those are really double turnovers, because it robs you of points on the board and it gives the other team the ball with momentum. So understanding situation, circumstance, displaying better situational awareness in key moments, all those things are correctable. All those things are coachable. And I would anticipate Doug Pederson really coaching Trevor hard on that. Some of the things that we'll continue to want to see from Trevor as he goes is, I just kind of want to see this offense get back to what they did in 2022, where it really fit. And I would say, like, it fit not only what the playmakers on the outside did, but how Trevor saw the game. And so at that point, remember, we saw a bunch of crossing routes, a bunch of intermediate routes, in breaking routes, a bunch of shallow drive, and those flanker drive combinations that were really staples in Doug's playbook in Philly. I think those things probably will reemerge, because they not only are staples in Doug's traditional playbook, they also really work well for the quarterback. I think you'll see more of that. The other part of it that you'll see, the deep ball come into it, because if you're able to work the field horizontally, side to side, and vertically with the deep ball, now the defense has to back up. They can't squeeze and clamp down on the offense, and we won't get the feeling that it's like watching the Jaguars play half-court basketball at your local YMCA, where you can't stretch the field, you can't move anybody, everything is really tight and condensed. They have to be able to move the ball on intermediate crossers, but they also have to be able to take some shots down the field to keep people from sitting at the sticks like we talked about. The final part of just the conversations and the observations of watching the crew down in Lake Tahoe is, look, man, these guys are ready. You can just tell that there is a sense of purpose that this team has. You felt that. You've kind of felt that throughout the offseason. And so when I weigh how these guys talked to me and they talked about the team, at the American Century Championships against what Josh Hines Allen has recently said to his teammate Eric Armstead on the Third and Line podcast, and what some of the other veterans have said, like Devin Lloyd and Foye Oluokun, Dewey, what they've talked about. I feel like this team is really, really motivated. And I know right now, as Jags supporters, we kind of get frustrated that everyone has kind of dismissed this team's chances of being one of the top teams in the AFC. But I just kind of like where this team is positioned. There's a belief, a strong belief that, look, internally, the Jaguars think they're going to be pretty good. I just think it's a matter of time for the rest of the football world realizes how good this team is going to be. So that's it. We got another week to wait before we get to see the team reports, all the rookies and veterans report. They kind of run around on the field and kind of get ready. But man, training camp is in a few weeks away. I'm really excited for it. And so until then, make sure you rate, review, subscribe to the podcast, wherever you get your podcasts. Make sure you check out all the great things that we have on the Bleav Network. Check us out on Fubo. Get great programming, not only with Jags, but if you also have like a secondary team, a backup team that you like, or you have a friend that likes a team, make sure you tell them to pop on. Some of my colleagues are doing great work talking about their respective teams. And so we want to make sure we shout them out and give them the love that they deserve. So until then, until next week, I'm Bucky Brooks. This is Bleav in Jaguars. I will talk to you soon.